We are all aging, and it's one of life's greatest privileges. But how do we turn the table on aging so it's not something to fear, but an opportunity to embrace? What if aging meant extending the quality of our life and learning to sit comfortably in our older selves as naturally as we did in our youth? I'm Jacinta Parsons, and brought to you by Uniting AgeWell, this is The Aging Ideal. Through honest and inspiring conversations, we'll cut through the noise to find out what it really means to grow older well. What do you feel like you would like to do still, but it's now too risky?
Probably ride my bike. That would be something I'd still love to do.
Just recently, when I was asked to go to Norfolk Island, I said no. I felt that because of health issues, I would be an impediment. I need to be realistic.
When we get older, taking risks becomes something we're forced to think about. But how much consideration should it have? Are we overcautious when we get older, and are the people around us part of the problem? Do we become so fragile when we age that we need to be wrapped in cotton wool? Surely we have the right to continue to take risks, but there are genuine concerns and serious consequences when we don't accept the challenges that aging presents to the risks we take. So, how do we find balance? And who gets the final say? In this episode, I'm going to explore risk and see what all the fuss is about. When that little voice pops into your head and says, "Are you sure you should be doing that?" How do you react? Your guest, Alex, heard that voice for the very first time last year at the age of 81 when she was planning to go skiing, something she's enjoyed regularly throughout her life. Alex, when did you first hear that voice?
Something in the back of my mind was saying, you will fall at times, and then you're down on the snow on a hill with the skis attached to your boots, and you've got to get up. And that is rather more challenging than it used to be.
And I guess that's it, isn't it? When we think about risk and how much we'll take as we age, the consequences seem to be much more. So if you get injured, it can be really dangerous.
Well, it can take an extraordinarily long time, and it can change your life completely. That is part of my thinking, but I'm not a reckless skier. I'm a fast skier. I love it. The speed, the wind, the sunshine, it's just a wonderful buzz. I don't want to give it up.
I love that you're doing this at 81. Do you think you would be still going fast down the hill at 81?
I don't think it ever occurred to me when I was younger. You never know what you're going to do when you're older, do you?
No.
One of the big impacts on all of us, I think, are the way our parents age. So I had very long-lived parents, and I never heard them talk about aging. It never occurred to them that they were getting older. They just kept doing things that they enjoyed, and if they couldn't do something, they would do something else. My mother, who loved reading, had macular degeneration. So she said brightly, well, I can't read the print anymore, but I can listen to audiobooks. So they made adjustments all the time, and that's taught me to make adjustments as I get older, but not to give up something I love.
What would you say to people your age, friends, who will say to you, look, I'm a bit scared to go and do things. I would be too scared to go skiing. I can imagine you hear that often.
I have contemporaries who don't want to drive into the city, for instance. They find that too hard. I think one of the secrets may be keep doing everything. So if it's pretty complicated in the CBD with the funny turns and things, but if you're doing it on a regular basis, you keep doing it. And unless your eyesight fails, or that is actually one of my key interests now, Jacinta, is my health. And I would not take risks with my health, except you could say, well, if you're skiing, you're taking risk with your health. Because if your health deteriorates, then everything becomes more challenging, more dangerous perhaps.
But yet you will take your body onto a slope. So for you, it's about balancing up what that risk is versus, I guess, the happiness and the fulfillment you get in your life by doing those activities.
It does. So for me to want to ski at least once a year, I have to do a lot of exercise and strength work and balance to be able to do that. Now, if I didn't do all of that during the year, I probably couldn't get on the skis and go down the slope.
I've cancelled my passport. I don't want to travel internationally or interstate anymore. I don't want to go to the airport and stand in long lines.
Not that I ever bungee jumped or anything like that before, but no, risk, I'd be going the other way, definitely less rather than more.
As I've got older, I've noticed starting to get a bit of vertigo. So I'm conscious of that all the time. It's just being aware of what my limits are.
After talking to Alex, I was wondering, how do we actually work out what risk is worthwhile taking? So I went to speak to an expert. Professor Joseph Ibrahim is a leading voice on ageing, risk and dignity in later life. He's from the Australian Institute for Primary Care and Ageing at La Trobe University. He's challenged the way we think about safety and freedom for older people, and his work advocates that taking risks isn't just acceptable in old age, it's essential to living well. Welcome, Professor Joe. Can we get that intimate to begin with?
Thank you. Yes, you can.
Look, I really want to understand right from the get-go, because I think, is this potentially where we come unstuck, that we don't have a shared understanding of what risk is? What is risk?
You've hit the nail on the head. Is we don't have a shared understanding, and I don't think we ever will have a shared understanding. There are two aspects to risk. One is risk is seen as a value proposition. So what do you value versus what does another person value? The other type of risk is what we'd call is an actuarial or a quantitative risk, where I can give you a number around what an activity is likely to cause harm, so the probability that harm will arise.
Yep.
So the risk of surgery, if you're going to have open heart surgery, the risks of dying, the risks of a complication and getting an infection have been calculated and well known. And the value proposition there is, the assumption is that you want to live and that you don't want symptoms. When you move that to how you live your life, comes back to where do you want to live, how do you want to live, what choices do you want to make? And, you know, the scenario I give is, do you want to climb Everest, or is climbing Everest for a 90-year-old the same as going out for a walk in the rain without anyone supporting you because you like the smell of the rain and the wet grass and you don't mind slipping, falling and breaking your hip and dying? We laud the people and for their bravery, and it's something that a lot of people would like to be able to do or think that that's a grand achievement. When you're older and have significant disability, the grand achievement is, I value the solitude, or I value the sense that I'm independent.
Really interesting, because when we're thinking about this as value proposition, that's when it starts to make sense. How do we manage that collision of values when we're looking at risk for the way we live?
It's really challenging, because family members or loved ones want to protect and keep you safe. What they often don't understand is why such a petty little thing matters so much to you and why you are arguing the point. I think what older people are not good at, or none of us are, is really explaining what something means to us and how important it is to our life.
So if I want to drive down the shops, but I have been told it's not safe for me to do so, but that's really important to me, am I going to be assessing my capacity effectively?
Well, no, but that doesn't change because you're older, and it doesn't change because you have a disability. The person involved, they're mostly interested in the benefits. The person who's worried about the risk is the one who can't see any of the benefits and only sees the downside. You can very clearly articulate and document, any number of harms, and I'm able to do that for my patients and residents. What I can never do is list off the benefits for the person, because I haven't lived their life. I don't know what they value unless they tell me, and I don't know how much of their life is left.
This is where age is a really significant factor in these discussions around risk, because when you're talking about dignity of risk, is that about when we lose our autonomy to make choices around how we want to live our lives?
So the idea of dignity of risk, life is in a sense only worth living if you are able to make decisions. And it doesn't necessarily matter whether decisions are good or bad. They're decisions that you made. You have some autonomy. And having that autonomy is what makes life worthwhile. And
that's a big call. I mean, that's such an important thing to understand. If autonomy is crucial to a good life, then that must factor in hugely when we do equations around risk.
What society sees are the material aspects of what a good life is. Mm-hmm. And what we're talking about here in autonomy is intangible in the senses you can't see autonomy. You can see when it's taken away with restrictive practice. But again, what you've got are visual cues that people are either sedated so they can't do anything, or they are restricted and restrained. And so you can see that autonomy is removed. You don't see autonomy in the sense that someone has got a blooming love affair late in life, and anytime that happens, questions are immediately asked, has mum hooked up with the wrong person and why is she interested in this 90-year-old and she's spending money to buy him a car? The challenge with supporting autonomy is you can't judge the decision. And one of the difficulties about not judging the decision is there enters then an element of potential for abuse. And so if you're trying to protect a loved one, supporting your older relative or family member, this is a second love, their second love of their life. At the back of your mind, you're wondering, is this real? Are they being taken advantage of? How do I do that? And you're not going to easily negotiate that discussion.
Is it reasonable that we ask questions of capacity for our loved ones to make good, strong, autonomous decisions? Because I guess that's at the back of it as well. Autonomy is a wonderful concept.
Well, the fundamental of autonomy and dignity is as long as I don't hurt you, I don't need to justify any of my decisions. It's a big step to accept a reason that you don't think is reasonable that someone else is making, but that's not your decision to make.
So what's the advice? If we know that risk-taking is something that's fundamental to us, if we choose and we have autonomy, how do we solve this often friction between those that love us and ourselves around the way we feel we need to live our lives? What's that conversation? How does it look when it's done well?
I think it's coming to a notion where you have to accept that there are going to be differences of opinion. And that the fundamental question you need to be asking yourself is, what would I want for myself in this situation?
The complex part of this too, though, is that when your risk-taking affects others, if as a family member you know someone doesn't have the skills to take that risk, and we know that that could eventuate in harming others, how do we navigate that?
Well, we're struggling to navigate that. The discussion comes up about, are you too old to drive? The question really ought to be, when do you know someone who has a license is no longer capable of driving? And it's not an age question. Just because you're 70 or 80 or 90 doesn't mean you can't drive. We know the high-risk groups are young men. If you want to be consistent and not ageist, we would be saying that men under the age of 25 ought not be driving.
That's a really interesting way to flip this conversation. Sometimes, we look at families who are actually really keen for the elders in their families to have risks, to take risks, to be free, but we come up against service providers and the system that is also risk averse. How do we navigate that?
This is an issue of public health, public safety, as well as individual autonomy and individual preference. Do we as a society accept these risks in the same way that we accept the risk of drinking and driving to a limit, and say, as a society, we wish older people and people who have dementia to have the same freedoms that everyone else has, and we design the systems so that the risks are minimised? The question becomes then a community societal one about what is it that we're willing to pay for older people and people with disability.
It's been fascinating to talk to you about this, because what comes out of these conversations around risk is not only how we manage it, but also our perceptions as a community, as you say, as a family, as individuals, around what ageing really looks like.
Or the reason things don't get done is we always think this is not going to be me.
Yeah. As a man sitting here in front of me with 2 new hips, you know all about it.
I do indeed. The future is now.
Professor Joe got me thinking. What I perceive as a risk, the next person may not. So how do outside influences and opinions shape how we live and dictate what risks we take? Being told you can't do something has to be one of the most difficult conversations our elders and those who love them are having. I really want to get a glimpse into how those conversations work to understand things a little better. Caroline felt that her mother Bridie driving was a risk not worth taking. So I asked her what conversations she was navigating with her mother around risk.
Mum is 90 and we wanted to ask Mum to give up driving. However, she's very active, she's very sharp. And when I was in the GP clinic with her, I did ask him if we could talk about Mum's driving because I needed somebody with more authority than myself. And he felt that Mum was fine.
It's hard for all of us to make assessments on our capacity, and going to that doctor helps make it sort of outside of the emotional conversation that can happen with family.
Yes. But she was always sharp as a tack. She knew what lane she needed to be in. She knew exactly where she was going. But then one day something happened and she went across 2 lanes of traffic into a pole in the medium strip. I don't know what happened. Maybe her reflexes weren't so good, but they're just calling it a medical incident.
How important do you think it is at the end of the day that the elders in our lives get to make those decisions for themselves at the right time?
Look, I think it is important, but I also think family needs some help and education around coming to that decision. How do we broach this with our parents? And how do we do it in a way that it is also their decision? We have to have them in the conversation.
It is one of the tricky conversations that we have across our generations when we're thinking about risk and how we stay safe and how we keep autonomy, as a precious thing. Can I chat to Bridie?
Mum, Jacinta would like to talk to you.
In Australia, there's actually no single age when older drivers must resit a driving test. The rules, they vary state by state, with some requiring medical checks from 75 and on-road tests from 85, while the others rely on self-reporting and a doctor's advice. These measures, they're not about wrapping people in cotton wool, but recognising that with age comes, well, of course, experience, but increased risk. And ensuring the safety of the whole community remains a shared responsibility.
Hello.
Hello, Bridie.
You want to speak to me, I believe.
Of course I do. You're right in my vision today because did you feel like you were taking a risk by driving at all?
No.
And about that accident, and I'm sure it's still a bit of a shock for you to talk about, do you wish you had stopped driving earlier to avoid something like that happening, or do you think it was just one of those things?
No, it was out of the blue.
Did you feel, even though it happened because of an accident, did you feel better that you made the choice about not driving anymore than anyone making that choice for you?
Yes. Nobody said don't drive anymore. I just decided myself.
Yeah.
In case anything else happened.
Pat Sparrow is CEO of COTA Australia. It's the national body advocating for the rights and well-being of older Australians. With decades of experience in aged care and policy, she champions dignity, autonomy, and the right to take meaningful risks in later life. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
How do we balance the right to take risk and safety of community?
It's a bit about reframing the approach. I think we've had an approach in the past where it's people can't do things because it's risky. We need to reframe the approach to say, what is it they want to do? Why do they want to do it? How can we help them to do it? And to have honest conversations with people and make sure they're aware of the risks that they're talking about taking, but setting up that structure and framework for a conversation to take place, to talk about, maybe there's something that you want to do that there's an alternative to, or if you really want to do it, how can we make that happen in as safe as possible, a way as possible.
It's interesting because we spoke to Professor Joseph Ibrahim earlier in the episode, and he was talking about, really clarifying the fact that we do this to our elders, but we don't really kind of intervene at any other period in our life. It's a really hard thing to broach with someone as well.
People have made decisions all of their life and they make good decisions and bad decisions, but it's like in people's minds, there's a magic age
at when you're perhaps not going to make a good decision or when we have to have a different conversation with you about a decision that you're going to make. I understand there are some different things in care settings that need to be considered, but generally, I'm a person, I make my own decision, I should be able to do it. And nobody should question just because I'm in my 60s or 70s or 80s, really, have an underpinning question about whether or not it's a right that I have to make my own decisions.
One of my 80-year-old friends recently said, if somebody asks me again if I need to go to the toilet before I get into a car, I'm going to scream.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of that undermining, as you said, I'm 85. I've been working that out for a very long time.
And look, I think the thing that we see underpinning all of this is ageism. And there's, I'm sure you know, but there are 3 different types of ageism that we see and that interplays. And people often don't know that they're doing it. So there's our own internalised ageism. And the example I would give there is I'm 62. I'm dyeing my hair because at some time in my younger years I got told nobody would listen to a grey-haired old lady. And so one of the things I do, which is limit myself, is go, I'm going to keep my hair colour up because I don't think people will listen to me professionally if I've got grey hair. So it's an internalised soundtrack about what do we think about older people, and we better not fall into that stereotype.
And I want to add to that, that's not something that you've made up. That is something that's pervasive in society, and we're just responding.
That's right.
As an ageing population.
And then you see what I would call benevolent ageism, which is what you're talking about then with somebody sort of thinking they're being helpful, saying, do you need to go to the toilet before you get into a car? And you see that all the time. And the Australian Human Rights Commission did a really interesting training course for aged care workers who said, we don't need to be trained in ageism. We love working with older people. That's why we do it. But after an hour and a half, they could actually identify things that they were doing in their practice that were ageist. And one of the women said, I really didn't think about it, but I realise I'm almost yelling at everybody because I assume they can't hear me rather than talking to the individual and finding out, can they hear me, or do I need to just make sure that I'm sitting looking at them?
And there's a whole lot of writing being done at the moment about elder speak.
Yes.
When you speak in almost a babyish tone, in a loving way, of course, you're trying to be gentle, but it's a diminishing that you think someone perhaps has got an infant idea of the world.
That's right. And I think that's why it's called benevolent ageism. The person's not really coming from a bad place. They're trying to do the right thing. But at its worst, what you see is it takes people's agency away, and it disrespects people in that, I'm an adult and I don't need you to yell at me because I can hear perfectly fine, thank you. So, that's a really important one. And then we see systemic ageism where it's baked into a system. And the example that I would give there is more in banking. It's really difficult if you're an older person to borrow money, because the system's kind of set up that once you're past a certain age, you're not going to be able to repay it, even if you can. So, there are those 3 levels of ageism that we have to address that come to play when people make decisions or talk about dignity of risk. And the one that I think is really interesting, I was talking with family about recently, is when do you stop falling over to you've had a fall? Which is often used to talk about an older person as if somehow falling's different.
Do you think there's a magic age where suddenly you've had a fall?
We couldn't come up with the age, but we think it's somewhere in your 70s. People start to say you've had a fall rather than you've fallen over.
Where have we seen ageism really play into the way that we treat elders regarding risk? So is it an undermining of capacity, or is it a silencing of voice?
It's probably a little bit of both of those things, but I think where you see it most clearly is a concern, an undermining of capacity that the person won't be able to do that, or that it's too risky. And you see it in care settings sometimes where people are worried about what that means for them as a provider, for example, the risk that they have to take, and they do have to balance that. But that's where you see sometimes the answer is just a blanket no, rather than, okay, if this is something the person wants to do, how do we have that conversation?
So interesting, isn't it? Because it's so embedded. I think as we age, we expect almost to limit ourselves and be limited. It's probably one of the most pervasive isms that we haven't really tackled yet.
People don't realise it. And, I go and talk to people about ageism and afterwards they say, hadn't really thought about it.
It's one of those things when I go around and talk as well, and I say it's really condescending to call elders cute.
Yes.
There is so much, oh my God, like reaction to, I do that all the time. You know, people reflecting on the way that they speak of and think of.
And you see wonderful role models now like Helen Mirren, who was really annoyed recently that she was walking along holding hands with her husband of, you know, long standing, and people going, how cute, they're holding hands. Would you do that for any other couple that was holding hands? No, you wouldn't. And so I said people just don't think about it, and so they don't identify that they're doing it. And so one of the biggest things with this is to actually have conversations and talk about it and work out how, you know, you yourself are doing it and addressing it and calling it out when we see it.
Let's talk about the good stuff. When have you seen someone perhaps who's taken a risk and it's ended up being a wonderful outcome in terms of their well-being?
I think just the thing about being able to take the risk is really important. I'll give you a personal example. My mother, who sadly is no longer with us, but very independent woman. It's a really small example, but gave her control over what was happening. She'd ask someone to come and change a light bulb in the house. Didn't come quickly enough. She got the ladder out. She's in her 80s. She got the ladder out. She climbed the ladder and she changed the light bulb. And we did have a conversation. I did have a conversation with her about, you know, were you worried about falling? Did you think it was a good idea? And she sort of said, well, I wanted to change the light bulb. And I think just the sense of control.
At the crux of this, and it sort of just hit me now because of what you've been saying, is how do we balance duty of care, particularly in the aged care setting, and dignity of risk?
Yeah, and look, I think that is often a concern and a clash for aged care providers, and residential care is probably a good example of that because someone's moved in and the provider is responsible for the things that happen to the person in that home. But that doesn't mean that dignity of risk should be overridden. And so it's really important in those instances, again, as we've been saying, that there is communication. So if an older person wants to do something and the home initially kind of thinks, oh, you know, our duty of care might be challenged by that, actually still sitting down and going through with the person what the risks are, but taking it from the approach of how do we help the person to do that. But you can take the person through that. Talk about some of the risks that you see, make sure that they understand the risks that they're taking. And in aged care, it's about documenting the conversation and documenting where you've landed. It might be that you come up with an alternative that both of you feel. This is the important thing too. It's not about just the provider feeling that I can do that because it's less risky. It's about the older person also agreeing that that's the way to go. But having that conversation, documenting it, and then helping the person to achieve what they want to achieve is really important for providers to do that.
It seems the dignity of risk is the most important consideration here. It's a delicate balance of safety and independence. Should we stop doing the things we love simply because getting older makes them riskier? Or should we have the dignity to choose how fully we want to live? You've been listening to The Aging Ideal, a podcast for Uniting AgeWell. Subscribe free wherever you listen to podcasts. And for a list of really helpful services available to the community, you can head to the show notes of this episode.